It is now time for our keynote presentation, which will be presented by both Robert Hammen and Chris Schasse. I think most people here are familiar with Chris Schasse. We don't have to give him any more airtime. I think we all know him. Very excited to have Robert Hammen from the aerospace industry. For the last 20 years, Robert has worked as a consultant, contractor, and employee involving Macs, iOS, iPads, in environments ranging from small and medium businesses to K-12 to Fortune 500 companies. So it's kind of rare that we get to see someone that's truly seen it all. When I asked Robert, can you describe, anything fun or interesting about you aside from the fact that he's a Packers fan, he kind of said what a lot of us on these meetings say. I pretty much work all the time. So Robert is a great resource for our presentation today, which is just going to be going through the WWDC updates, the Worldwide Developer Conference. I'm sure we all know what that is. So with that said, Robert, Chris, I will turn it over to you two. One last thing. Caleb, if you wouldn't mind sharing the blog link in the chat, there is a supplemental documentation for this, so feel free to follow along. This blog, I believe, is also where we will post the recording of this presentation if you would like to revisit it later. As always, our recordings can also easily be found on the Rocketman YouTube channel. Usually a couple days after the presentation, we have to edit out my bad jokes. So supplemental documentation is in the chat. Recordings will be posted there. And now, Chris and Robert, feel free to get after it. Thank you, gentlemen.
Cool. Thanks so much, Eric. This is macOS 15, what you need to know. I will say Robert put together this entire keynote. I just slapped the LaunchPad logo on the bottom, and it's going to be taking you through a couple of the slides. And this was, just gave this at the Penn State Mac Admin Conference last week, and which is actually why we decided to move this back another week, partly because it was Penn State Mac Admins, but also because we were able to get Robert in here, and a celebrity like Robert was worth pushing it back a week. First off, I want to talk about managed Apple IDs. Super excited for some of these changes, as Howie pointed out. They're now called managed Apple accounts, not managed Apple IDs, which is great because managed Apple IDs did get a bad rap for a while. Great upgrades to this. Of course, there's going to be more federated Apple Business / School Manager with more identity providers, and then third-party providers via OpenID Connect and the Shared Signals Framework. If you want to go to the next slide, Robert. The next thing we're going to talk about is
there we go.
One thing to point out, if you're using domain capture to prevent people from using managed Apple IDs or managed Apple accounts on your network, you don't actually need to federate, which is kind of cool if you just want to turn off that feature altogether. Some more organizations want to do that. But the biggest thing I think a lot of us are excited about is this account transfer, because a lot of times people will set up their own personal Apple IDs with their company email, and then they start to put a bunch of stuff on it. And then you want to transfer over to the managed Apple IDs or managed Apple accounts. And they finally created a way for us to be able to migrate those accounts. And there's a couple different ways that are listed here. So you can do it via a new domain if you want, or you can even just use the appleaccount.com at the end of the company's domain. So very exciting stuff. Howie's going to test it out and see if his information actually, or his data actually migrates over, and then he'll tell us about it. Go ahead and go to the next slide. And this is also an exciting feature, which you can see right now in Apple Business Manager. If you log into your account, you can unlock devices that are in activation lock. I'm sure a lot of us have experienced this in the past where someone logs into an Apple ID on a device and then we're not able to get into it. So look in your portal, you're able to see it for some of your devices. If a device is not managed, you'll need to open a ticket with Apple still. So Robert's put a great workflow here to open an Apple Care activation unlock ticket. You'll need an Excel document, screenshots, from what is AXM?
AXM is what people
Apple.
generally call Apple Business or School Manager.
Oh yeah. I got that as I was saying it. Apple Business / School Manager. Yes. And then proof of purchases if they're not in Apple Business / School Manager. If you've had this process, you've probably seen it. So this is the actual screenshots from Apple Business Manager. I will say it's not going to be available for all your devices. In my current portal, I only see it available for some devices. And Robert, do you know why that is? Why I don't see it for all devices?
I'm pretty sure it requires like the T2 or later for Intel Macs, all Apple Silicon. And then I think it's like, A11 or other higher processor on iOS and iPadOS devices. So yes, it's not available for all, but should be available for most modern devices.
Cool. And then if it is on, if you go to the next slide, you can remove the activation lock right through Apple Business Manager. So this doesn't even need to be managed with an MDM. It just needs to be in Apple Business Manager, which is pretty exciting. And then new to management, Apple Watch. I mean, we've been able to manage Apple Watches, but there's new stuff coming there. And then the Apple Vision Pro, of course, they released that halfway through the year, which they're doing a lot of times. And Robert's got his that he's showing off right there.
Yep. It's on the 2.0.
Yeah, I haven't actually fooled around with this yet, Robert. Have you fooled around with either of the device enrollments yet?
Yes, this Vision Pro is enrolled in Jamf Pro.
Awesome.
Automated device enrollment. It's in Apple Business Manager. And probably the biggest thing for our InfoSec groups was the ability to have a lot more restrictions. Right now, it involved me leveraging the Jamf compliance editor and looking at the Apple device GitHub to see what function. Basically, I made a new iOS configuration in the Jamf compliance editor. Mm-hmm. And then I looked at all the keys. There were like 55 keys, and 31 of the 55 keys were actually supported in Vision OS 2.0 versus like 2 in Vision OS 1.0. So it's like a huge improvement from a security, and standards perspective and compliance perspective, coming from 1.0.
Yeah, and are you actually managing Apple Vision Pro for your aerospace company?
Yes, we got a couple of them right now. I fully anticipate we're going to get a lot more. But yeah, this is awesome. This is a Jamf managed Vision Pro.
That's awesome.
That I can put on our corporate wireless network and push restriction configuration profiles to and push apps to via VPP and so on. So
awesome. That's exciting.
Yep. If you had to play with the account-driven user enrollment, which is kind of like a personal device where it partitions the data, or account-driven device enrollment, where it's a corporate device where you have to like create a YAML file and host it on your web server, it's a giant pain in the butt. So being able to just leverage automated device enrollment, huge win.
Yeah.
I was undecided if I should upgrade to the beta, and I talked to some people at Apple. They're like, no, just do the beta, ignore the other stuff, and I have no regrets. So
awesome. Good to hear some info on that. Safari 18 extension management. You're able to control which extensions are allowed and which extensions are enabled and disabled. And then also control extension use for specific domains / sites. This is something we weren't able to do in the past. So it's exciting that we're able to do that now, kind of similar to what we can do for Chrome extensions. No complex scripting required anymore. With that, I'll hand it over to Robert to talk through the software update management.
So Apple's been trying to make a number of improvements in software update. I don't know if you guys have noticed, but when basically Apple broke software update when they introduced Apple Silicon Macs and the concept of volume ownership. The software update process was pretty unreliable all throughout macOS, from a macOS 11.0 all the way into the 13 and even early 14 releases. In most of your environments, if you're on 14, you should have your users should be able to, no longer should they have the issues of checking for updates and macOS telling them there's no new updates when in fact, that they're not on the latest OS. So Apple's done some good work there. But things about getting the update enforcement needs some work. And that's why the new Jamf Pro feature where it tells you why your update failed is a consideration. But for macOS 15, Apple is moving all of the software update configuration and deferral profiles to the new DDM, Declarative Device Management, versus MDM. So this obviously requires your MDM vendor to support it. Just to highlight MDM versus DDM, MDM was designed, when the iPhone originally came out. The iPhone was not a very powerful piece of equipment. So the idea is that servers were powerful and clients were not. And that the client would continually have to check in with the server and be able to say, hey, okay, this is my status, this is my inventory state, and the server says, oh, you need this. And so the client was pretty dumb. The server is doing all the work, but that obviously, as you get tens of thousands of devices, that puts a lot of stress on your servers, and it doesn't really scale that well. Another thing that's a limitation with DDM, or MDM rather, is, Apple's continually adding new features to the OSs. So let's say there's, a feature that you want to, that's for macOS 15, you want to pre-deploy it on a macOS 14 system. Well, with MDM, that configuration is only evaluated by the client when the profile is pushed to the device. So if the device isn't running 15 and is subsequently upgraded, it will not take that into effect. So this is what Apple is trying to fix with DDM. You can think of DDM as sort of the MDM 2.0 or replacement for MDM. And the client is more intelligent. You can push configurations down. You can push, various other data for like SSH config files and so on via DDM. And again, you can push a config, for example, firewall must be on. User turns the firewall off. DDM says, hey, wait a minute, and turns the firewall back on. Well, then having to go back to the MDM server and say, hey, this is my current state. Should I change? And again, you also get that advantage that you can push that configuration on a macOS 14 system. And when the system is upgraded to 15, it'll take that into account. So again, software update management is really all the stuff, all the settings you have about whether download updates automatically, install updates automatically, all your deferrals. You're still limited to 90 days. Right now, the process of enrolling people into betas is a very manual process. The user has to have an Apple account to sign in for the beta to show up. And sometimes the beta field doesn't even show up. So there's like a one-liner command you may have to have the user run to get it to show up. And you may have to create or federate Apple accounts for them. It's kind of a pain in the butt. So being able to, with macOS 15, we'll be able to push profiles to put devices into a beta program. Another new feature that's come to macOS, this is similar to the private MAC address feature that's been in iOS and iPadOS since iOS 14. And that is, it's a security feature, a security privacy feature to prevent, people from being able to track your device by generally randomizing its hardware Wi-Fi address. So the way that works on iOS and iPadOS is it randomizes that address once. It's a little bit different experience in macOS. And it's also iOS and iPadOS are also going to follow the way macOS works. And it depends on the authentication method. If you've got like WPA1 or WEP or an open network, that MAC address will rotate every couple of weeks. If it's WPA2 or newer, that MAC address is randomized once. The only time it randomizes subsequently is if you either erase and reset up the device or you forget and rejoin the network. There is no global off switch for this. You have to update your Wi-Fi profile if your network is dependent upon specific hardware addresses. You're gonna have to update your Wi-Fi profile to turn off the MAC address rotation feature in macOS 15. Another technology that Apple is pushing very heavily is the concept of managed device attestation. So a lot of times organizations will deploy a certificate and private key to a device. The certificate says this device is owned by company.com. Now it's possible for somebody to boot into recovery, assuming you don't have recovery lock set up, and access the system keychain and exfiltrate the cert and private key and put it on a non-managed, non-corporately owned device. So the idea of managed device attestation is to be able to store part of that, in particular the private key, in the secure enclave of either an Intel Mac that has a T2 processor or an Apple Silicon Mac or iOS and iPadOS devices. So you can pretty much be assured if you're using these managed device attestation certs that the device is owned by your org, because people are not going to generally be able to get that private key out of the secure enclave. Apple is making some changes regarding managed device attestation. They are going to limit it only to Apple Silicon and newer Macs and A11 and up, chips on iOS and iPadOS and tvOS. And again, you can use these managed device certs for things like Wi-Fi authentication or 802.1x Ethernet authentication. If you use the built-in VPN in macOS, you just deploy a profile. You can also use it there. But if you use an external app like AnyConnect or Global Protect, you will not be able to use device certs yet. I suspect that will be a feature in macOS 16, if not sooner. Obviously, a big push in the tech industry has been artificial intelligence. As this meme will show you, sell me this pen. Well, it's AI powered. Everything is AI. Microsoft had Copilot and Recall, which they had to recall, ironically. So a lot of organizations and the government are very concerned about the AI features in the new OS and how to control it. So, and those new features won't actually even be available. They're not available. If you're on the beta right now, you don't have access to any of the AI features. Apple has said the beta features will be available this fall. They have also said that there will be restrictions revolving around it. Basically, there are 3 different types of AI in macOS. There's on device, so the data never leaves the device is. And then Apple has their private cloud compute, which is their kind of idea of having a very secure, high secure environment where your data is randomized and the servers are like tamper proof and so on. Apple's building their own server hardware again, but they're not willing to sell it to anyone. And then there's also working with third parties. And the one they publicly announced was OpenAI for some of the writing tools, but Apple has said that they are willing to work with other AI providers. So it would not surprise me over time to see Google and Meta and XAI all join the party with allowing for external connections, but we'll be able to control that. And if you have any concerns in your organization about AI features and being able to restrict them, I urge you to file feedback. Apple has said the restrictions are coming. We're starting to see some of the preference keys show up in the beta 3s of iOS. So some more additional minor changes, hardware key support during enrollment, so people can leverage a YubiKey or smart card to authenticate rather than username password. A couple of new screens will show up during Setup Assistant. There's a welcome screen, very similar to what you see in iOS and iPadOS that you can now skip, as well as settings to control Apple Intelligence. So there'll be a new skip key for that. As Mac admins, we have to deal with a lot of different file formats. We deal with XML, plist, and so on. If you have to deal with, YAML, things like that. If you have to deal with JSON, chances are you probably had to install the JQ binary on your system. So Apple is now including it in macOS by default. If we remember back to the time of macOS 10.15, when Apple announced that Python 2 and Ruby and Perl were deprecated in the OS. Deprecated doesn't mean it's deleted. Deprecated means this is going to go away sometime. Apple just doesn't tell you when. And in the case of Python 2, that happened in macOS 12.3. But Ruby and Perl are also deprecated, but they are still included in the betas of macOS 15. Here's something that Apple added, particularly I think this is for organizations that maybe have non-admin users and they may consider migrating MDMs. Used to be you could reassign the Mac from one MDM A to MDM B, then run this sudo profiles renew -type enrollment command. Well, now you don't need to run sudo to do it. So it's one little tiny step to make things a little easier. This is a big one that I think a lot of people overlooked. There's a couple of different package formats on macOS. There's the standard package format, which most people don't use, where the packages can have things like resource forks and so on. These haven't really been widely used by anybody but Adobe in a long time. When you would go into the Adobe admin console and generate your Photoshop package, it would give you a disk image that had a installation package on it. And if you actually copied that to like an SMB share, you break it. So, like if you would try to use Jamf Admin or something to upload it, Jamf Admin would zip the file before uploading it. That was to prevent the non-flat package from breaking. So Apple's kind of finally pulled the plug on non-flat packages. So what does that mean for you? Well, again, the most people who have Adobe packages like in their Jamf Pro or other MDM before macOS 15 ships, you're likely going to have to log into the admin console and generate new packages that are not flat, so they will install properly. Otherwise, if you're seeing the beta and people are trying to install Photoshop from like self-service and it's failing, this is probably the issue you're running into. Some more talk about background task management. Apple added some controls back in macOS, I think it was 13, where users could turn off login items and launch daemons, launch agents, and admins were very concerned about it. So Apple added controls that you could basically prevent the user from turning things off. These launch agents and launch daemons are both for system or user type processes. They have known locations in /library, but they're not protected. And so as a result, users can go in, especially if they're admins, and like unload or disable these launch daemons or launch agents. Also, a lot of times when a Mac gets malware or adware or something like that, it's because users have been tricked into installing something that installs a launch agent or launch daemon that will like put a proxy in place and start spamming ads or things like that. So it looks like Apple is starting to sort of deprecate the whole traditional launch agent and launch daemon because they've added new functionality with macOS 15 via MDM to be able to have secure tamper-proof storage of executables and scripts. So again, it's a very early stage of getting rid of launch agents and launch daemons. It'll probably happen over a few OS versions. One feature they did add to macOS 15, which is a bit concerning, is the ability for users to turn off endpoint security extensions. And, which led to this lovely meme. We let users turn off endpoint security extensions, but admins can prevent that, right? So ended up, a lot of people filing feedback, which Apple actually introduced something in macOS 15 beta 3, which attempts to address this. However, the new key they've added is incompatible with the removable system extension key that you may have in a profile. What is that removable system extension key? Well, that's if, let's say that you have an application that uses a system extension like AnyConnect or Global Protect, and you update that. You want to set that key so that this can be removed, so that basically you can push the package to update the software. Apple now has that you can't have both turned on, at least as of the current beta. So this is a good reason why you want to be testing and filing feedback to Apple about these changes. One more thing about background tasks: if you have any users that are, traditional Unix heads that like cron tasks and stuff like that, they're also on the way out. If they are enabled on your system, you will see the option to turn it off. The options won't appear if you don't have any of these set, but it's starting to look like Apple will be phasing support for the legacy Unix models out of the OS as well. And I think, Chris, we're over to you now.
So one of the biggest things, well, not the biggest things, but one of the things we're excited about is the ability to prevent people from plugging in external storage again. So this has been deprecated for a long time, and it had a bunch of like old keys that didn't really make sense. Go ahead and go to the next slide, Robert. But now we can finally restrict external storage again. So you can block external media entirely or make it read-only, and you can also block SMB shares.
And I was just going to say, those two features weren't present in the old feature. And this is stuff that's also dependent upon declarative MDM too. So
Jamf Protect already does that.
Right.
No?
Yeah.
Yes.
I think so, yeah.
Did you mention
this will be able to be done through a configuration profile now.
Yeah, Jamf Protect had a very robust way of restricting devices from mounting.
Yeah, that's what we've done. We've used Jamf Protect to mitigate that.
Yeah, so I guess not that great of a feature if you have Jamf Protect, but if you didn't have Jamf Protect, you can now do it through a configuration profile, which is theoretically better. Local network access. Apps and launch agents will prompt users to approve. And I was going to ask you about this, Robert. Is this going to be the Jamf agent as well? Or is this going to be other types of launch agents?
I haven't seen the Jamf binary prompt to do this, but I've literally seen other things, even things like ping or, or some of the other commands, or, like people who are leveraging Monkey and Managed Software Center fires up. It wants to scan the network. I mean, this functionality has been available on iOS and iPadOS for a while, as Apple's bringing it to the Mac. Mm-hmm. But like people are running sysdiagnosis and getting network prompts.
Yeah, exactly.
So this still needs some work on Apple's side.
Yeah, and as you said before, admins have currently no control over this. Potentially because Jamf is a launch daemon, it's not falling into that category, but still something that we want to file some feedback about. Yeah, Robert, you want to take it over and talk about Kerberos?
Yeah, so we start getting the network stuff. There's 80 binding, which a lot of organizations should not be using 80 binding. They should be using something else like Jamf Connect or something like that. But if your organization uses on-premise AD, you could leverage Apple's built-in Kerberos SSO extension. This allows you basically to have a local account at macOS. Ever since macOS 10.15, this replaced the old Enterprise Connect product. And you'd have a local account that synchronizes its password with Active Directory, and the user always has a valid Kerberos ticket. And Apple has added a few new preferences. You can start in smart card mode, enforce smart card mode, don't allow smart card mode, don't allow password, and then some certificate auto selection settings. Obviously, the future of where Apple wants everybody to go is platform SSO. And this has been around for a couple of macOS versions. It was introduced in macOS 13, had some real basic support, had some limitations like not being able to create a local account on the fly. macOS 15 now gives us some additional controls regarding whether you want identity provider authentication, allow it for file vault, the lock screen, login window. You can also configure or deny Touch ID and Apple Watch unlock. And there's some additional offline and authentication grace period stuff. If somebody's on a plane and can't get on VPN to your network, can they still auth if they need to do something? The only consideration yet with Platform SSO is those organizations that want to go truly passwordless are not going to be real happy with it, because File Vault is still requires a password, at least initially. And you know, this was quite funny because Sean Rabbit of Jamf at Penn State made a cake that just said, "Please, Apple, please fix File Vault," and was handing out slices during his presentation talking about Platform SSO. So highly recommend watching Sean's presentation when it's up. Virtualization Framework. How many people knew that macOS could actually run virtual machines? You know, besides macOS, you can also run the ARM version of Windows and some Linux distributions. If you need to run Intel, you know, Windows, you're going to have to buy Parallels or something like that. But there are some limitations to the virtual machines. You can't, first of all, you were never able to sign into iCloud, which is now addressed. As long as you have a macOS 15 VM running on a macOS 15 host, you can. You also couldn't use erase all content in settings. So if you wanted to test like a workflow or something, you can do that now on macOS 15 as well, as long as you're running on a 15 host. The one thing you can't do, which would be most helpful, would be if you could test your automated device enrollment workflow. Because how does automated device enrollment work? It sends the serial number during enrollment of the device to Apple, which says, "Oh, this is associated with this MVM." Well, what's the serial number of a VM look like?
Well, I've been doing this for a while, actually.
Well, yeah, you used to be able to hack this with like with you know, like Parallels or VMware, but you can't do it with the built-in virtualization framework.
If I could make a comment, I have had experience with this at a previous company, and when inquiring with our Apple sales engineer, it is possible to purchase serial numbers for virtualized environment. I would like to make that comment. I don't know if that's still true at this very point, but it is a thing if you speak to your Apple engineer.
But yeah, I think you could do that for like Parallels or VMware, but I don't think you can do it with the virtualization framework. So, and the virtualization in macOS is limited by license agreement, not physical restriction. They said maximum 2 virtual machines on a macOS host. Doesn't mean you can't run more. You're just breaking the license agreement if you do.
Well, actually, I've tried doing that before on Apple Silicon, and I actually will get an alert that I can't, which was silly because I still have my 8-core Core i9 MacBook Pro with Parallels on it, and I can boot up and run like up to, I think I've had up to 4 VMs running at the same time, and that thing just keeps chugging along. That thing is like super powerful, you know, at least for Intel systems it was.
And
Yeah,
you still
speaking of
can't
something
assign serials. You can't assign serial numbers on Apple Silicon still, right? In Parallels or anything else, because it's not supported by Mac OS, right?
I know you can't with the virtualization framework. I haven't tried the other apps since on Apple Silicon.
Did you
Yeah,
say
I
you
stopped
can or you
using-
can't?
I haven't tried it.
With Apple virtualization, you haven't tried it?
Well, with Apple virtualization, you can't assign a serial number. There's no way to do it. I haven't tried it with Parallels or VMware on Apple Silicon.
Yeah, same thing. Okay.
Yeah, I stopped using virtualization for testing a while ago because there were just so many problems with it. And Apple made it a lot easier to do the erase all contents and settings and to test things a lot easier. Moving on though, Active Directory binding still works, fortunately, or maybe unfortunately, I don't know. But there are a lot of directory service plugins that are no longer supported. Some changes to system settings as well, some UI tweaks for macOS, iOS, and iPadOS. Opening system settings will now default to general, not appearance. And profiles is renamed device management, just like iOS and iPadOS.
Yeah, in macOS, it used to be in, system settings, privacy, and security profiles. Whereas in iOS, iPadOS, it was, settings, general, VPN, and device management. So now it's the same place on macOS. Apple's been tightening the noose on turning off the gatekeeper function where apps have to be, signed and scanned to run. They took the features out of the UI. You could still use the command line binary to disable it. And now the only way you can disable it is via profile. But why are you disabling gatekeeper in 2024? You should have signed apps. This is a big one I haven't had an opportunity to test, but I'm looking forward to, because how many people have had this issue with Windows switchers where somebody switches from a PC to a Mac and then complains that when they go to mount this network share that they do on their PC all the time, it takes like 3-4 minutes because the Finder is sitting there iterating through 4,000 files in the root of a directory. So Apple supposedly made some performance improvements tuning on this. Another point is if you have any kind of automation in Jamf that like checks the application firewall preference plist to see if the firewall is running, be aware that plist no longer exists. You'll have to use the socket filter firewall command to both check if the firewall is running, like an extension attribute, and then a script to turn the firewall back on. Or you could deploy a profile, using DDM. Apple's built-in AV tool, XProtect. You used to get all updates through software update. Now there's an actual XProtect command line tool that you can write an extension attribute to script, detection, what version of XProtect installed, and then update itself. There are some additional system integrity protection restrictions on the library group containers. I think last year they added protections on library containers, so this makes sense. These are sandboxed environments where preferences are stored. And if you have any kind of automation or scripts that use Disco or DS import to change home directories, like so say a user got married or divorced or changed their name or whatever, be aware that you will get additional prompts to approve. The scripts won't just run. They'll actually get a dialog saying, hey, this wants to do this, kind of another more PPPC stuff that you can't pre-approve. Back in the 10-15 days, Apple announced that CUPS printer drivers and PPDs would be deprecated. Still there, still works. One big thing, and this is something Apple intended to introduce into macOS 14.4 until the admins community screamed about it. Apple has newer screen capture APIs they want all developers to use because you inherit all those features, like it does the fireworks when the accidental features that people found out about when like video conferencing. The problem is that this is a developer problem, not a sysadmin problem. And the sysadmins are like, why are you spamming our users with these dialogues that they can't do anything about, or we can't do anything about? We can't make Microsoft Teams support the new screen capture APIs. So Apple kind of kicked that can down the road from macOS 14.4 to macOS 15. The latest version of Mac Evaluation Util will actually identify any apps that are using the old APIs. That'd be any version of Microsoft Teams, Teams Classic, which is pretty much dead, and new Teams. The rumor from Microsoft is that they are testing it internally and they will have this addressed before macOS 15. But if you're an organization that uses Microsoft Teams and you have people in the macOS 15 beta, they're going to see scary looking dialogues.
All right. When will macOS 15 ship? I'm not a betting man, but I'm going to say probably sometime in September, October, or November.
We are proud to actually announce the launch of Rocketman Sportsbook. So if you'd like to place your bets, this is the opportunity. We have an app that will be live.
So yeah, we don't know. It's going to happen soon, though. Soon is in a couple months at least.
The thing that drives Apple, of course, is the yearly iPhone updates. So that's when iOS ships, and then macOS is usually just after that. As you saw, they slipped all the way into November back in the big Sur days because they had a lot of work to do to get Apple Silicon working, and even those first versions were really super buggy until like 11.2, 11.3. So they've been kind of moving back a little bit. And last year they made the big jump from end of October to end of September. It wouldn't surprise me if it's another end of September release again this year, because the betas are really solid.
Right. Heard it from Robert himself. Place your bets for end of September. Cool. With that, I think I'll hand it off to Eric.
All right, everyone. Yeah, we'll see y'all next month. I do believe our next month's meetup is back to our cadence of the first Friday. We got to get back on schedule somehow. I know this one moved to the middle of the month. So 2 weeks from now, we are doing another Jamf Admin meetup. So look for those invites probably the Monday of that week.
Thank you, everybody, for attending.
Thank you. Thanks
See y'all
for
next month.
the presentation, Chris and Robert. Awesome.
Thanks, everyone, for joining.
Thank you for joining us today. We have new episodes on the first Friday of every month. If you'd like to join our session live, visit the link in the description to get on our mailing list. And if you're looking to get the most out of your Jamf server, visit rocketman.tech to set up a meeting with one of our Jamf experts. That's rocketman.tech.